Well, it finally happened yesterday. The Minnesota Vikings officially release their safety, the guy they drafted a few years ago, Lewis Cine, and the 2022 NFL draft class from the Minnesota Vikings has officially become one of the worst draft classes in Minnesota Vikings history. It's very interesting. I just Googled Lewis Cine's name, and I'm just looking at the headlines. It says, Minnesota Vikings make stunning decision on former first-round pick Lewis Cine. Why was that a stunning decision? Lewis Cine joins Christian Ponder, Matt Khalil Ethers, an infamous Vikings group. That's a good headline. Vikings waive former first-round pick who could be fit for the Buccaneers. Vikings waive first-round draft pick from UGA, which stands for Georgia. Lewis Cine last year couldn't even dress for most of the games. He was a healthy scratch. Couldn't even get on the special teams unit. Couldn't get time. And the leg injury, I'm sure that set him back for a little bit. Obviously. It's not like you're going to come back the next day after you break your leg. But a few years later, in 2023, after you're drafted, after you've had time to recover, and the Minnesota Vikings tried to find a trade partner to send Lewis Cine somewhere else. And the interest in him was so minimal that there was not a team that wanted to take on that guaranteed money and send over a 7th-round pick. And the guaranteed money wasn't all that much either. Lewis Cine is clearly a talented individual. He's got a big body. He's got speed. But there's something missing, and I don't know what that something is. But clearly, the Minnesota Vikings couldn't find it. And clearly, there was not another team in the NFL that wanted to risk a low draft pick for that money to take him out because they just thought the Minnesota Vikings couldn't find it. He will sign somewhere after the Minnesota Vikings waived him for a very small contract. There is some team out there that will take a risk to bring him in to practice, to training camp, and blah, 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 blah. But wow, what a draft bust. And especially when you look at the players the Minnesota Vikings could have had in that draft, like Kyle Hamilton, the Baltimore Ravens safety. He's already one of the best safeties in the league. And that was the guy the Minnesota Vikings could have drafted. I think it was 14th overall. And then they traded back for like the 5th year in a row. It was so frustrating because it seemed like every single year the Minnesota Vikings would have a pick. They would trade back and accumulate picks later on. This past year where the Minnesota Vikings got McCarthy and Dallas Turner, it seemed like it was the first year ever that they were actually aggressive in the draft. And I think that's why most fans were so excited about it, because they're so sick and tired of the team trading back, acquiring assets, acquiring late round picks, acquiring this, acquiring that for a bunch of hot garbage. It's like, get talented players on your squad. Get guys that can play. Give up a late round pick to get your guy. Who cares? How often does a late round pick pan out anyways? But Lewis Cine is gone. And I just did a video on Lewis Cine a week or two ago. And I talked about his breakout game versus the Cleveland Browns. And it was very interesting to read the comments because, I'm going to be serious. I was rooting for Lewis Cine to make the team. I wanted Lewis Cine to make the team because he has talent. But I wasn't surprised. I called it that one game against the Cleveland Browns in preseason isn't going to do much for you. When you have years of failed opportunities, when you have years of bad tape, one game against third string players in a preseason game isn't going to change the landscape or opinion of the people that matter. It's just not going to happen. But the comments were very interesting. This guy says, "Why did you say KOC and Flores don't like him? Stop making crap up." Or you need to tell me the source, but you can't. And my response was, because of the playing time he gets. And then the guy says, "Exactly. Good day." So that doesn't quite make much sense because he didn't receive playing time. So why would you think that they like him if he doesn't receive playing time? Doesn't make any sense at all. But I think it's funny about that is I made a claim that they don't like him because he doesn't touch the football field. And this guy responds and says, "You're making crap up." But he didn't respond and say, "Well, they like him because of this reason." He didn't bring a source up and says, "Well, they like him because blah, 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 yada, 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 yada." I said they don't like him because he's not on the field. Pretty obvious. And then here's this guy. "I don't care what anyone says. Kyle Hamilton would have trouble getting on the field behind Harrison Smith, Cam Bynum, and Josh Metellus, especially if he broke his leg and lost 50 pounds of muscle in the process. His body had to recover. He's basically a rookie this year, in my opinion. It's on Flores to find a role for him." And my response was, I don't think you'd have struggled getting on the field ahead of Cam Bynum or an old Harrison Smith. Harrison Smith, as legendary as he is in a Minnesota Vikings uniform, and he will go down in the Purple Ring of Honor, is one of my favorite players of all time for the organization. He is older, he is slower, and we saw it last year. His best games for the Minnesota Vikings came against the bottom feeders of the league. He's an average safety nowadays, and he performed really well against the Carolina Panthers, and he performed really well against the Chicago Bears early in the season when the Chicago Bears were struggling to put anything together. Against the good teams, Harrison Smith was pretty invisible. So Kyle Hamilton would have had no issue at all getting on the field above Cam Bynum, Harrison Smith, and Josh Metellus. I would say Josh Metellus is the best safety of that group right now, just because he's so multidimensional. And Brian Flores would have found a spot for him somewhere on the team. But an old Harrison Smith and a Cam Bynum who's decent, but not that great, but not terrible, solid, Kyle Hamilton would especially have played. It's not even a question. So Lewis Cine, he's gone. It kind of bums me out because you look at players and you can see talent. It's not that hard to see talent. And he's clearly got the body, the physical traits. But there's that something missing that the Minnesota Vikings just couldn't find or figure out. And now it's up to another team to try to figure that out. So hopefully the draft classes in the future aren't this bad. It's pretty hard. This is legendary bad. This is one of the worst of all time bad. So, anyways, Lewis Cine, he's released from the Minnesota Vikings.